Welcome to Myth Busting with OpenAthens. Do you know your proxy from your SAML? My name is Georgie. I'm one of the OpenAthens account managers, so I'm responsible for making sure all of our customers make the most out of our service and our products. So, to introduce you to our other panelists, we have Stephanie. Stephanie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Georgie. And thank you, Georgie and Gary, for allowing me to be part of this conversation. I'm Stephanie Kaceli from Cairn University. I'm Dean of Educational Resources, but most importantly, I'm the director of the Masland Library. And my day-to-day includes many things, obviously from administration to folio to acquisitions, etc., but always brings me back to authentication and OpenAthens. And we implemented OpenAthens back in 2017 from WAM, and we've never looked back. So I'm really excited for this conversation.
Thanks, Stephanie. Gary, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Gary Brewitt. I'm a technical consultant for OpenAthens, and I primarily kind of oversee most of the implementations and onboarding, and also help with any kind of technical issues that pop up that might need my attention.
Thanks, Gary. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. So we are recording the session, and the recording will be shared within the next week or so with everybody by email. And you will see a questions panel. So that should be open now. So please feel free to use that and put any of your questions in there at any time, and we will come to them at the end. So without further ado, let's bust some myths. So our myth number one, proxy and IP recognition is just as secure as federated SSO. Gary, I know you've got some opinions on this.
Yeah, so, well, I guess before we really answer the question, it's probably important to kind of identify what is proxy IP recognition and what's federated SSO. And so what we mean by that is proxy authentication is where you're using a location-based IP address that kind of that IP address is used to tell a publisher what location you're from, usually your organization's on-site IP address. And typically then with federated SSO, that's actually a technology called SAML. SAML is a protocol that stands for Security Assertion Markup Language, and federated SSO is built from that. And yeah, I guess to answer this question, is IP recognition more secure? I would say no. Federated SSO is usually much more secure. The reasons for that is that IP access is, well, there's no user verification, so there's no guarantee who's actually using the resource. It's basically anyone that's on the same IP address. And so it's really difficult to kind of revoke access for individuals or know who's truly accessing the content. And then also with IP brings in some other sort of applications like VPNs, and those can spoof your location and make it less secure. Whereas with federated or SAML, users log in with their own identity that's usually tied to an institution's identity provider, or IDP, as we will probably continue to refer to it as. And you have a lot more security because you're using, so with SAML, you're using assertions via XML through web browsers that pass details that have been provided from, as I said, your IDP. So for those reasons, it's very much more secure than proxy access.
So can we go ahead and confirm this myth is busted?
I would say so, yeah.
Fantastic. So Stephanie, do you have any thoughts on the security aspect of this?
Sure.
Did it come into play at all when you were looking to buy OpenAthens?
Oh, absolutely. So one of my little anecdotes I like to share, and this is pre-2017, mind you, we were still on WAM, and we wanted to get JSTOR for alumni, and we were going through everything, getting ready to sign the contract, and they came back and told us, sorry, you can't, because of WAM and because of its limitations, we cannot confirm that you are going to be able to ensure it's just for alumni having access to these resources. And that was a long time ago. And I feel as though we're talking about, we're kind of comparing apples to oranges in so many ways, because the federated SSO and SAML, they are adaptive and can change with the changing of security, whereas Proxy and IP has a lot of issues in the background in terms of security, and a lot of vendors really don't care for them very much. So, and a lot of vendors are coming and asking for less to ensure that you don't, so without walk-ins, if some of the contracts don't allow walk-ins, well, how are you going to make sure if you're relying on IP access? Beyond that, also the ability to audit, the security that comes with that. If we have a breach, we're able to track that down a lot easier. We also have OpenAthens behind us if there is a breach, and they can help us track that down as well. So I think for us, it's kind of a no-brainer.
Because we've got the tools in the background, haven't we, Gary, to sort of help pinpoint where any sort of like misuse is coming into play, haven't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of comes back to the fact that, with IP access, it's very kind of anonymous as to who's using it. Whereas with federated or SAML, as I said, every login is tied to a user, and that user's identity is kind of coming from the institution they're part of. And so, yeah, it's much easier to find that audit trail to track down what's going on.
And I think in this area, Gary, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but even the restrictive mode that we've chosen to use in OpenAthens has a lot to do with the security side.
Yeah, so absolutely. So restrictive mode essentially is a feature that OpenAthens has that essentially makes it so that you can with your users, so you can integrate your local user directory with OpenAthens, whether that be something like Azure or Google Workspace or Okta, Ping, those types of things, and you can put when your users log into OpenAthens, they can be assigned different kind of permission sets. So let's just say, for example, you have a law department, and anyone that logs in and is from the law department will be assigned that permission set, and that permission set will kind of contain very law specific resources that no one else has access to in the organization. And so you can just restrict user access yourself, and that can be really important for things like negotiating new deals with publishers around smaller subscription users. So definitely really interesting.
So moving on to myth number 2, because I think we might come back to restrictive mode later potentially. We have users prefer proxy and IP recognition for its simplicity. Stephanie, I believe you have some comments on this and how your users have found this.
Absolutely. I think one of the things for this myth, even looking at the simplicity, the scalability, and I also think simplicity, scalability equals sustainability. And what can you use and have that you can update and change to make it work for your institution? And one of the things I'm always amazed with OpenAthens is OpenAthens has a huge client base of many different organizations all around the world. And they're able to make this work. And for us, one of the things that we have really appreciated with OpenAthens is we created a separate connection for our alumni as well as our dual enrollment instructors, because they don't get the Google sign-in. So our patrons, our students, our faculty and staff, they all have their Google login. We know that they're current and that all works well. But what do you do for alumni? I don't want to give them the generic username and password that we've had to use forever and ever, and everyone always trying to change passwords, etc. So that that's been a really helpful tool for us. I also think the simplicity of adding new resources, when we aren't adding that many now, but when you do have to add a new resource, most of the time it's just sending the data over to the vendor. The vendor knows what to do with it, and then you go into the back end and get that turned on, put in what you need to do. It's very simple. And then the other piece that I think is really important in the simplicity is the ability to troubleshoot issues. And OpenAthens allows you to have customized error messages, which I think is really important. And for us, our biggest issue we have now is we use Google, and for authenticating our students. And so they use their Google account, or for our whole community. And if they're in their personal Google account, they'll get an, oops, that's an error. It's a broken computer. I can almost guarantee when somebody reaches out to us that that's going to be the problem. But what's really nice is I can go into the back end of OpenAthens, go into and take a look and see that they haven't even touched our the OpenAthens side, which means they aren't being recognized. They haven't even tried to really truly log in. So I can just give them the workaround, which is go into incognito, open a different browser, or change your profile, which is a lot easier than trying to figure out when a stanza isn't right, when an IP address might not be right, or figuring out who has our ranges.
Yeah, I'd like to just add a few things as well. So yeah, with IP access, it seems kind of invisible, and when it's working, it seems effortless. So if you're on campus, for example, and you're getting access, great. But what happens when you go off campus? That's where the complications start, right? And then you need to start using things like a VPN, which can be rather clunky, and as we mentioned, not as secure either. But also with federated access, users will log in one time. Let's say at the start of the day they log in, and when they log in, they can be presented with their familiar user login portal. So when they see that, again, come back to simplicity, that's something they're familiar with, and they'll just log in, and then I believe it's for 8 hours you get a cookie in your browser which will let you access all of the content you subscribe to, and you won't need to log in any other times that day. So that keeps it nice and simple. But then also with federated access, you can access work from anywhere. It's not just on campus, it's literally worldwide on any type of device as well. And then so it's definitely a lot more simple, and in terms of like the upkeep from Stephanie's point of view is probably, I mean, I'm going to imagine, Stephanie, that you've probably had your account set up and you've probably not had to go in and do much since then. Am I right?
Nope, just adding a connection here, changing when we went to Folio, just a couple tweaks to make it work. And
right.
And I think the point you made also about on campus and off campus being the same, that truly does allow you to troubleshoot with your patrons in person instead of trying to do it over the phone or email or Zoom. And it's just so much easier to walk them through the process when they're on campus than when they're wherever they might be.
And I'm going to assume then as well, since you moved away from WAM, I think you said it was, have you found that you've got reduced help desk inquiries around these kind of off-campus issues? Or
Great question. Absolutely. It was almost overnight. I was like, wow, this is great. And you know, we hear a lot of when things don't work. I've had about 2 instances that and I've been at Cairn for 23 years where I've been thanked for a change. And the day that we went live with OpenAthens, I had a student come into my office and thank me for the change and that it's so much easier to use. I was like, oh, wow, okay, great. So absolutely, I think, and really that's what we want it to be. It's not just being streamlined or scalable on our end, but the same thing for our customers is really what needs to happen.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more of that focus on user experience now than what there used to be as well. And Gary, you might need to give us some technical details on it, but when you're accessing content through the federated authentication, you can get to where you need to be through Google. You can get to it through the web. You're not having to use any particular links. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a great point, Georgie. So there's multiple ways to gain access to content. A lot of organizations have like an A to Z list or some sort of library management system, maybe an intranet page, and we have the tools and features to give you kind of what we refer to as OpenAthens redirect links. Essentially kind of like if you're familiar with like an easy proxy link, it's just a prefix link that you can append to a URL, and you can click on that and be taken to the resource via federated SSO. Alternatively, because you're using federated access, you could use Google and just search for what you're trying to find. If you say, you just search for the resource, and then you'll go onto their website and click login. And at that point, you'll go through what I refer to as a WAIF page, so a where are you from page. And so you would just search for the name of your institution, and then you would be presented with a very familiar login page if you hadn't logged in that day. If you had already logged in that web browser, then you don't need to log in, obviously. You'll just be taken directly to their landing page, and it will say authenticated. But yeah, so great point, Georgie.
Yeah, you can really start from, I'm sorry. So you can really start from anywhere, because, we can spend all of our time with our A to Z lists and our library sites and all of that. But the reality is our patrons are starting from everywhere, other than the library a lot of times. And we are able to get it seamless. And the simplicity of it is kind of the beauty of it, because there's so much going on in the back end, but the fact that it makes this easy transition. And I think one of my favorite things when I'm using LibKey Nomad is watching it do the little quick handshake that if you're watching, you can notice it, and then up pops your PDF, and it's fascinatingly wonderful.
I would say this one's busted.
Oh yeah, it's busted. There we go. It's officially busted when it's on the screen. I know this is on the topic of simplicity, but when students or users can access things from any point on the web, like you say, Stephanie, they're starting at any sort of point, whether that is from your internal systems or from Google or from a specific link. Mm-hmm. It's increasing your usage of the subscriptions that you have. You're getting better value out of it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Great point.
Yeah.
So moving on to myth number 3, proxy or IP recognition provides better access control. And this is where we may revisit that restrictive mode. But speaking in comparison to proxy and IP, Gary, have you got some thoughts on this?
Yeah, and I mean, the nature of this kind of webinar is that we are in a discussion, so we probably will repeat a few points here. But yeah, absolutely. Access control is much better on SAML or federated SSO. Just for example, we can send suppliers details about who the user is, such as whether they're an alumni, whether they're a staff or a student, and based on that information, perhaps they've got a different the publisher might have like a different set of resource, for each individual. So there's that, and then also like personalization So features, maybe they have like a bookmark feature or some way of you to sort of save your searches. That will all be stored on your account so that when you log back in again, all your information is there. And yeah, that doesn't necessarily have to be details, because I know there's a lot of concern around sort of like personally identifiable information. We can do things synonymously using attributes like pairwise ID or targeted ID. So those can be, you know, like a unique string of value, basically, that represents an individual without giving any, you know, details over, like first name or last name. So yeah, it's definitely a lot more feature rich on the federated side, because obviously with IP it's all location based, and even if you're from that location, we don't know who the individual is. So anyone that's logging in via IP is going to kind of get the same experience, and there's no personalization.
And that'll have a knock-on effect for reporting as well.
Yes, obviously with federated access, you're going to be able to, I think Stephanie brought this up earlier, around sort of like any sort of misuse. So if a publisher comes to you and says that, you know, there's been some misuse, you're able to, or they'll be able to give you like that individual's targeted ID or pairwise ID. They won't know who the individual is, but you can then check it on the back end of OpenAthens as to who that is, and then, you know, find out what, you know, why that is. Or, you know, if you've set up your attributes so that you're passing, you know, what department an individual's coming from, whether it be like the art department or the science department, you can see, you know, you can use that information when it comes to purchasing new resources, you know, whether or not this particular group of users are accessing the content you've purchased for them, or if, you know, you might find that a different department's using it more, and that might change where the budget comes from. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to use it. And actually, Steffi, I don't know if you've got any examples of what you use reporting
Sure.
for.
So I think one of the really most important aspects, I mean, sometimes with this question or this myth, I think, what are we actually even trying to control with IP access, right? I mean, it's really kind of the great wide open. Anyone can come. If we have IP access for databases, anybody can come from off campus, park in our parking lot, and download and use our resources. And so when we're looking at usage, we're not seeing, we're getting back from the vendor maybe that this is getting heavy usage. But then if we have everything set up right in OpenAthens with the federated and people logging in, then we can actually see who is using these resources. So if we have a database that is getting heavily used by guest access, but not by our community, and we're asked to cut our budget, well, what are we going to cut? You know, I mean, it's going to have to be a resource that is not being used by our people, and that's giving us that information, and so we're able to control that, I think, a lot better. And I think
management over the access, you've got better access control.
Right. And just going back to the ability, I know a lot of sites use this as well, but with that, with the restrictive mode, being able to say, okay, this is a health science resource, and we're going to make sure that it's the health science department accessing this. And when you do that, and it's a set number or whatnot, you're then able to negotiate better. And so because of access control, you can negotiate better on your contracts.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it's come up twice now with sort of like what's happening on the publisher side, with IP and proxy recognition being a more outdated technology. I don't like, publishers are wanting people to have this SAML authentication as well. It's protecting everyone, it's protecting content, it's protecting access, it's protecting money. So it's a really interesting point that keeps coming up. It's not just on this side that it's beneficial.
Yeah.
So I think we can say this myth is busted. Gary, do you have something else to add?
Yeah, there was one other thing. I just wanted to also mention that with IP access, obviously, if someone has left the organization, there's no way to kind of revoke access. Stephanie, you mentioned someone could just pull up in the parking lot and bust out their laptop and start downloading things, whereas you have that instant ability to revoke someone's access with federated access. So yeah, you could just go and log into your admin area, find the person and click suspend, or just completely remove them entirely. So yeah, and what's also great about that is you don't necessarily need to go to your IT team to do that, because you have the ability to do that in your tool with OpenAthens.
That's a really good point, actually, Gary. It might come up again for another point, but when, particularly if you're looking at access to resources, you've got SAML, and under SAML, you've got potentially like bilateral connections, so your one-to-ones, your peer-to-peer connections, or you've got your multilateral of your federation. And those one-to-one, those bilateral connections being set up are typically going to have to be managed by the IT team, because that's who has access to those local directory, like Azure or Entra, whatever it is now. Can't keep up. So all of that access is, and that access control is staying with the IT teams, not who is looking at the budgeting of where these, of what's happening with the resources and who's working with them on a daily basis. So it's nice to put that control back in librarians' hands.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I think, well, you said quite a lot there, and so I'm just gonna try and break it down a little bit, just in case, you know, just so everyone can kind of understand what you mean by that. And so with SAML, and we've been talking about federated SSO for most of this, but there is also the ability to have just SSO, so without any kind of federation involved. And the way that's done is if you're using some sort of enterprise SSO system, Azure or Entra ID, Google Workspace, Okta, Ping, there's probably 10 or 20 more of them, I can't remember. It's possible to exchange your identity provider information with a service provider kind of directly. You can do a metadata exchange and kind of become trusted to send SAML to each other. It's a lot of kind of setup, and there's a lot involved with that. But that's the benefit of a federation. With a federation, you're all sharing your metadata already. You're all trusted. You will trust each other, so that you don't have to go around making those individual connections with every publisher you want to sign up to. So yeah.
I think without further ado, we can move on to myth number 4. Our penultimate myth. Proxy and IP recognition is easier to manage. Stephanie.
Haha. No, actually, I mean, think of proxy, unless it's in the IP registry and not, I mean, IP first, unless you're in the IP registry, and you change your IP there and it notifies the vendors. But, you know, there's still a lot of vendors that aren't part of the IP registry. So every time you change your IP, I remember, thankfully, we've been stable for a while now at Cairn, but there was a time where they were changing IP addresses left and right. And every time they changed or added something, you needed to then contact each and every one of those vendors to make sure that they had your proper IP address. Where now, because of OpenAthens, we don't have to worry about updating our IP address at all, which is great. I also think the idea of when you're adding a new vendor, and add the new resource. I still remember the nightmare of having to figure out the links, particularly our proxy links with WAM. And that was a lot in the background that I had to keep updating and had to keep changing, and then testing and making sure it worked. And if it didn't work, reach out to somebody else to see what they were doing with it. And that that's disappeared when we add a new resource. It's a pretty simple, just a couple steps into getting the resource added. If it isn't there and I need to add a custom resource and I'm not sure where to go, I open up a ticket and then we make sure that we have everything right. And then beyond that, just the links, and Gary mentioned it earlier, but particularly the links, there's the redirector tool. I always forget the exact name for it, but it's magic. You put in your link, link generate, yeah, and you put in the link you have. So particularly, Alexander Street Press is just notoriously, and several others, just they drop everything out of the URL once you authenticate into it. But if you need to get a professor to put in a link for students to get to it, you just go to the redirector tool and you put in your URL, and it spits out the exact link that you need, and you test it once and it works, and it's fantastic. And there's no going, okay, does this work on campus and off campus, and how is this doing it? And if it works on campus, it's going to work off campus too. So
I think it's really interesting, like from easier to manage from a reporting point of view.
sure.
I think we've got that checked. From a resource point of view, we've got that checked. And from a user management, I know we've talked a lot about local directories, but I mean, with OpenAthens specifically, you don't necessarily have to have that local directory in order to benefit from this. You can create your own personal accounts and manage it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Gary, do you have any points on this?
Yeah, I guess another one when it comes down to kind of easier to manage. Typically, from customers I speak to, they have, if they've been using IP, then it's basically been the librarian who's been doing all of the troubleshooting, trying to figure out what's wrong with the proxy. Very kind of little support. With OpenAthens, obviously we have the service desk, who are kind of on hand to provide any any support around any issues with resources and the likes. So I would say there's that to consider. Also, we've kind of talked about it before, but it's just removing complications such as taking away things like the VPN and like, with proxy IP, if you're hosting a proxy server, then you've got all of your SSL certificates to manage as well, which obviously is just added kind of overhead for people. So I think what really pins federated access as more manageable really is really Stephanie's own admission that it's kind of been set up and it just works. There's no need to pull your hair out about trying to access things with IP. So yeah, I guess I just add that.
I think your call dropped while Stephanie was saying about she can raise a ticket and get support. And I think there's a lot to be said for being able to just contact someone to say, hey, I've got this issue, what's going on? And not having to spend hours searching the internet trying to find other contacts who are having similar issues, what's been happening before. So yeah,
apologies for that. I did drop out. I'm not sure what happened, but I'm back.
And also vendors. OpenAthens has the relationships with the vendors. And so even yesterday, there was an issue with a tip-on, however you pronounce that, and Wiley and Sage. It wasn't an OpenAthens problem. It was a vendor problem, but there was communication and then things got resolved. But it was, it's not good it was down, but one, we knew it was getting taken care of, and two, it did get taken care of, and then we were told when it was back live again, and all within less than a day. So
I think, Stephanie, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit, but when going back to when you were managing WAN and what your sort of day-to-day looked like when you were managing the IP proxy authentication compared to now, so I'm sure with all that time that you're saving, you just put your feet up, relax. You're not
That's
able
like
to
my
do anything else
bonus. No, no, I'm just not up till midnight working to make up for the time that I had to spend tracking down a problem. And trying to convince a vendor. I still remember I saved all those emails of having to convince a vendor that there was a problem, and I can't, and you can't tell with all the vendors if they have your IP address correct. You can't tell from them if they gave you the right information, etc. And even what Gary talked about with SSL certificates. I mean, having to figure out SAN and SSL, and at one point it was you would have to add each entry for the database onto a SAN certificate, and the amount of money that was it was the amount of time and the amount of money in order to manage this was outrageous.
Be happy to move on to our final myth, because I can see we've got a few
Sure.
questions coming in as well. So myth number 5, you can't have both proxy and IP, proxy IP recognition and federated SSO. Can I be first out the gate at busting this myth? Because as OpenAthens, we are the complete solution. We are the living proof that you can have both. Stephanie, how have you found? Did you like the transition over, and did you do it slowly into OpenAthens, or did you dive both feet in first?
We dived both feet in first, all OpenAthens. The only thing, and we're still working on this piece of the IP recognition on campus. We continue to move our new resources over to just be through federated and getting better statistics. And but the IP was important. We had a lot of people who didn't ever want to have to hit a login. Why am I being asked to log in? But now I think we're past that. So we're doing some updates. We are doing Stacks, SSO, bringing in OpenAthens with our website, again with Folio. And then also we're going live on the new UI for EBSCO. And between all of those new things, we're going to totally knock off the IP recognition, but we can add it back if we need to at any point. But you really can have it all, because that is what OpenAthens is. OpenAthens, not all resources are available with SAML, unfortunately. So those that aren't, then they have a little note of a little thing on the catalog that they're proxied, and so you know that they're going through that way. But it really isn't any more difficult to set it up. It's just, it would be nice if they were all SAML for our patrons' ease of use. But it all works itself, and it all manages, and with the proxy and with the federated, just the ability to manage them all in one place is great. So
Yeah, because I think there's a lot of trepidation with jumping into a whole new setup, a whole new authentication process, a whole new workflow, everything. So I like to try and reassure customers that, hey, you don't have to move everything over straight away. If you didn't want to, you can keep some things like on the proxy. That you've got options. It's up to you at the end of the day.
But we moved everything we could, and it was everything we had. So it was.
And there's no looking back.
No looking back.
Gary, did you have any points on this?
I mean, yeah, I guess just to touch on this a little bit. So yes, OpenAthens does support federated, and we have a product called the OpenAthens Managed Proxy. As Stephanie mentioned, not every vendor supports federated access. So there's a lot of legacy sites out there that only do support IP. And there's a bunch of different kind of use cases here. So for example, if a federated resource went down for whatever reason, there's a lot of vendors also have proxy set up as well. So there's a backup. So there's that kind of extra bit of security if something does go down. But also, as Stephanie also mentioned, there's the ability in OpenAthens to kind of ignore federated access if you're on campus and just go directly via IP authentication for whatever reason. You know, there could be a million reasons why you'd want to do that. So obviously you're limited on all of the reporting and things like that, and you know, that kind of granularity, but there's basically just, we have the tools to do kind of whatever you need to do to get authenticated. So I guess that's kind of just the main thing there. Also with the redirector tool in OpenAthens, essentially when you put a URL into the OpenAthens redirector tool, it will generate a redirectable waifless link that the tool is smart enough to know if it's a federated resource, it will take you via the federated route, and if it's a proxy resource, it will take you via IP authentication. But the neat thing is that your kind of end users are going to click on a link and they're going to find themselves on the site that they wanted, and they're not necessarily going to know the difference. So it just brings it back, I guess, to that kind of simplicity of just keeping it simple, and people just want to be able to, you know, get to the content. They generally don't care about, you know, OpenAthens or what it is, as long as it's working. And I think that's the most important thing, really.
Yeah, the splash screen is the splash screen is the splash screen for our users, regardless of how they're accessing it. And I think that's really significant. And yeah, and one more thing to add, if that's okay, it's kind of goes
Please
through
do.
all of this, is with, oh gosh, did I just forget? Oh no. Oh gosh, it's gone. There was
Gary, what
something
did
I
you
was
say?
going to say, so it's okay.
I'm sure it can come back to you.
This
You
is
just
what
need to go over
happens.
the last few
Very
minutes of
organic,
conversations to
everybody.
remember.
Yeah,
It might come back to you.
I hope so, because it
Should
was kind of a
we
cool
go
thing.
to a couple of questions?
Sure.
So we have got some coming in. Stephanie, there are some good ones in here for you, but there's one saying, have you found that you've seen increased usage on your electronic resources since going to OpenAthens?
Yes,
Good question.
because it's a great question. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm looking at, I mean, it's been so long, right? But every year our usage ticks up. And I think one of the neatest things is to see how OpenAthens works with our libkey nomad and our third iron integrations that we have throughout, because that is yet another piece of the, you're starting where the patron is starting, and you're getting them back to your resources. So, and it all starts with being able to have a good authentication running underneath that. And being able, when libkey nomad is installed, it just is this seamless access. But and also the redirector link, I think, is so important, because if somebody hands you a URL or a DOI, you can pop that into the redirector tool, and it'll pop out. If we have access to it, it'll give you the link. So yeah.
I'm sure there's some metrics out there somewhere, but there was something around if end users come onto a platform, if they can't get in straight away, they'll typically just leave and they won't attempt to gain access again. So hopefully with that simple process, you'd hope to see an increase in usage.
Yeah, and I think we've been spoiled.
And you're automatically
and I think we're spoiled because we've had OpenAthens for so long. I kind of forget how everything that's going on in the background, but it's giving all of our patrons, like, they're starting on a level playing field in terms of access, and it's not difficult. It's, are you a current student or are you alumni? You click on that, and then if you're a current student, it just pops up with your Google that they see every time they log into anything else on campus. So I think it's dropped so many barriers for our patrons.
That's a really good point, actually, because have you linked up your OpenAthens to like an intranet, Moodle, whatever it may be, sort of LMS?
No, we have not.
Because a lot of our customers who use like internal LMS systems, who always say LMS systems, even though the S is systems, people using that, when they log in to their whatever it may be, the moment that they've logged into that, that started the OpenAthens session. So even when they're going through their online library looking for content, they're just clicking and clicking, clicking. They're getting in. There's no login process. So that session starts before they've even gone
Well,
to any
right,
as well.
right.
And that comes back to that.
Yeah, because anytime they get into a Google, anytime they're authenticating into Google, I think Gary even mentioned it earlier, they could be getting in for a different system, but because they've authenticated in Google, they're off and running.
It's clever, isn't it? There's another question here, Gary, or have you got one lined up?
Well, both. I can either take your question or I've got one here as well. So, do you want me to go?
Yeah.
Okay. So, do users need to be loaded into OpenAthens before they can use it? So the way OpenAthens works is you have a dashboard, and you have a couple of options at this point. So you can either set up what we call personal accounts. So that's where you create a user an account in the admin area within OpenAthens. So you go to account, create user, put their information in, and now that user has an account. Obviously, if there's a large number that you need to enroll, then we have like a bulk upload system. So you can upload an Excel document or an Excel spreadsheet and do a large batch of users all in one go. The other method is we can connect a local user directory. So something that supports SAML, something that supports OIDC. There's probably about 6 or 7 other technologies that we support for that feature to log in. And what that does is, in the easier to explain example of, like, say, Entra ID or Azure, your IT team will have like your user directory, and they will integrate that with OpenAthens. So essentially, when they log into OpenAthens, we will pull their data from the Entra ID, and it will come into OpenAthens. So it's just like a kind of like a replica account of what would be on your local user directory, and the information being passed is only going to be information that you would have specified. So if you wanted to pass us like first name, last name, email address, then that would be the only information we would receive. If you wanted to pass some other information, maybe you've got things like department or shoe size or something crazy, then yeah, we can kind of take all those attributes in, and then you can decide what to do at that point. The third option is that there is also something called a self-registration page, and that allows users to kind of just log in and create their own OpenAthens accounts. So there would be like a hosted web page, they'd fill in this form, and based on some logic, they would either create an account and it would instantly be authenticated and they'd be good to go, or you may want to have manual acceptance turned on. So if someone's logging in with like a Gmail account or something like that, you might want to kind of vet who that user is first before agreeing to give them an account. But if they're logging in from, say, their institution's email address, then you may just say automatically register that user as an account. So there's a bunch of different ways to kind of get users into OpenAthens and using it.
That's cool. I think that feeds into another question on here, Gary, regarding myth number 3. With access control. It says, is user identification determined by attributes that are supplied to OpenAthens by the institution's IDP? If so, are there tools in OpenAthens to help libraries when institutional IDP attributes are not accurate?
Let me just reread that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not quite sure if I understand that. So And
So if I
myth
understand it
three,
right,
what was myth 3 again? Let me remember what that was. That might help.
let me try and go back. Better access control. So if I've understood the question correctly, the attributes that we receive from your local directory are determined by you and what you want to share with us. If there's an issue with the attributes that have been sent to us, or if they're not accurate, it would depend where that inaccuracy would be. Because, for example, if one of your students, users, have been given an attribute that hasn't been mapped correctly within the OpenAthens system, we'd pick that up on. So we've got a schema editor where you can basically map in the different, I'm getting very technical when I shouldn't be doing technical things. Basically, what if that information that we're receiving isn't right? What happens then?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a hard one to answer, because it's, well, if you're sending us someone's first name and last name, but maybe you've spelt the last name wrong, well, we're not necessarily going to know that that's wrong. So it's kind of, what's being passed to us is, you know, the values and things like that we don't have any real control of. You're the identity provider still. So it's kind of, I mean, like I said, we can control what we send to, like if you send us a bunch of information about a user, maybe for your own records, because you're using OpenAthens and you want to have first name, last name, email address on the admin area for your own benefit, so that when you're looking through user accounts, rather than having, you know, just a bunch of numbers and letters that don't mean anything, you can pick out someone's name. So that's fine. But then when you're signing into a resource, you might not necessarily want to send all of that personal information. So there's ways to decide what you're sending to a publisher. Like we have a global release policy that we, you know, typically send to publishers, but there is, you know, lots of granularity in terms of like transform rules. You can transform attributes so that you know, if value is this, then send this different value to a publisher. I hope that maybe answers some of your question, but yeah.
You're too technical for the likes of me, I'm afraid. There is a really good question here for you though, Stephanie. How do you handle walk-in users? Person who's asked this question said, we've negotiated for walk-in access to be login free for patrons. Is there a way to recreate that with OpenAthens?
I'm going to lean on Gary a little on this one. For right now, this is one of the reasons why we still have a lot of IP access for on-site, when our A to Z list is just one link, but if they're on campus, it just passes through and doesn't force them to authenticate at the moment for most of our resources. So the resources that we have shut down right now are the ones that aren't allowed to have walk-in access. But I do believe there's a way, Princeton Theological has worked this out, where I think they have very specific IP addresses for guest or for another way of accessing it. But Gary might have a better solution than
we have access accounts, don't we, Gary?
We do have access accounts. So the account types, you have obviously personal accounts, we have access accounts, and then we have like the user directory accounts. So with access accounts, typically, let's just say, for example, you've got a library with maybe, I don't know, 7 or to say 10 computer setups that people can kind of walk in and use. You may have like the access accounts as like PC1, PC2, PC3, and those users will be able to log in and access federated resources. But obviously, in terms of like tracing who was using the computer at the time, that would kind of be you know, we would be able to identify which machine or which access user profile it was, but obviously the individual is a little bit kind of taken out of it there. So there's other ways, you know, to handle that. If with personal accounts, for example, if it's someone who's going to be like a contractor coming in, you know, you could create them a personal account and maybe a minute and a half tops, and then disable it whenever they're kind of the kind of job is up, I suppose.
And
So
you could
there's
also use your IP as well, right? I mean, if you just have your
right.
guest range, that's the only one that you allow for IP access, correct?
Yeah, so yeah,
different
absolutely.
resources.
So, and that goes back to using proxy and IP kind of together. Sorry, not proxy and IP, proxy and federated access, you know, they can be used in unison. So
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a theme. So we had another question come in saying they're a land grant institution, so they're obligated to provide access to walk-ins. So it's crucial for them to be able to still have IP recognition. And can we facilitate it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It would be making sure you have that IP range in OpenAthens, and that's the only place you need it, right? You don't need to make sure that everybody, I think that's right. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Help me, Gary, there. But we haven't had any issues. We're not land grant, obviously, but we have guests come in to use our resources, and we don't have any issues. And I know we have our IP somehow set up in, I apologize, this is something we set up so long ago that I'm
that's
trying to
okay.
remember how we did it all. And yeah, but
with any question that we're not able to either answer 100%, we will be trying to send out some sort of Q&As after this. So yeah. There is a good question here, actually. So, hi, I'm wondering if both proxy IP recognition and federated SSO are used for a library resource. Is that any preference to choose? Which method to authenticate once a patron used that resource? Is it counted 2 times as usage? One for proxy IP report and one for federated SSO report. So, for this one, yeah, some resources have a proxy version and a federated version. If you're using the OpenAthens redirector tool, then our tool will favor the federated resource. So if you take a URL for, say, I don't know, google.com, and you put it in the redirector, it would send you to Google via the federated route, and that would track in your federated reporting. It wouldn't do one for each. However, the resources are, even though it's the same publisher, in terms of reporting, there's 2 kind of different entities here. So if you had, let's say, for example, you wanted to have like a link created specifically for proxy access and one specifically for federated access, which is possible. Each of those would come up as like their own individual resource in a reporting report. So yeah, so there's that to be considered.
We have just time for this one last quick question, Stephanie, which is for you. Where's it gone? Are you using the libkey nomad ++ product now?
++. I don't, dear me, probably I would say not yet. I haven't even heard of that one yet. I am so sorry. I'm catching up. But we're using, I mean, we use libkey nomad, and we have it work for scholarly articles. It works for ebooks. It works within Wikipedia and all of that stuff. So I'm trying to remember what the ++ is. I apologize.
It was written in the question. I'm not familiar. Okay, so we are approaching the end of the webinar. If you are interested in what OpenAthens can do for you at your institution, please do get in touch. I want to say thank you again to Stephanie and Gary for helping and taking part in our webinar. And hopefully you have found this very interesting, very informative, and you'll join Federation soon. Any answer to Q&As will go out within the next week or so, and I think the recording will be sent out a little bit sooner. But thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.